I am absolutely just stunned. I mean, this thing just made it 1,000 miles through the desert and 110-degree weather, like through Death Valley and all that. Didn't really skip a beat. No issues with it. I was towing the Corolla, so we've had like 12,000 pounds. Didn't skip a beat. Probably spent about $380 on diesel. Again, 1,000 miles. I drove 22 hours straight with a 1-hour nap. And got a few oil leaks, had a coolant leak. Actually had a really bad coolant leak. It was coming from the water pump. One of the bolts backed out, so just tightened that back up, refilled it with coolant. One of the things I did actually was I RTV'd the valve covers to the valve cover gasket because I was seeping out through here, and you can see a little bit of black RTV on there. So that helped. Oil level is still pretty good. One thing that I did is I installed a oil PSI gauge. So I went on top of the oil filter housing, came through here, and it's a mechanical gauge. So it's just a little Bosch, and it's been reading 60 PSI most of the time in 5th gear and 4th gear at around 60 miles an hour. So that kind of helped ensure that I knew that I was getting oil and not losing more than I was putting in, and running the risk of spinning a bearing. But anyways, we're here in Las Vegas now, nice and hot. We actually had record floods, apparently flash floods, so it's been pretty cool driving this thing through the water. I'm just again baffled that, you know, a few weeks ago I had this out adjusting the timing. So looking into the engine bay here, we have the P pump out. So what essentially happened is I ran out of fuel. Fuel lines are going to be coming from the tank, and I'll show you. This is actually the overflow valve fuel line, which goes back to the tank because that's a low pressure line. I'll show you the rest in just a minute here, but I ran out of fuel and this wasn't running anymore. So the issue was I went around a corner and the pickup tube in the tank didn't have enough fuel in it. So I starved it for fuel, and the fuel rack on the injection pump became seized. So I looked it up and I didn't find any easy solution for it except for taking it out of the truck. And what ended up being the problem was this aftermarket fuel rack travel plug. What this does, I don't have the original, but it's bored out and the profile is a little bit longer, and it allows for the fuel rack to travel more, which allows you to get more fuel. So I'll demonstrate how this works in a sec here. The way I figured out that it was the issue was by bleeding the fuel system, making sure there was no air in the lines, which there wasn't, and diagnosing lift pump, all the other things except for the injection pump, because I was hoping that it wouldn't be this, because to get these things rebuilt is very expensive. So go ahead and explain what's going on here. These are your governor springs. We already did those. This is the throttle linkage. This is the fuel shutoff solenoid. So what this does in here is the fuel shutoff solenoid, when it's up, it allows for the travel of the throttle. This is the throttle linkage is one here. That's gas, that's no gas. That's idle gas, idle gas. So at idle here, when you start up the truck, the fuel shutoff solenoid goes off, or the plunger comes up on this, and it allows for travel of the throttle linkage. The throttle linkage was moving forward and backward like this, but this pin back here, this is the throttle linkage that the AFC live housing rides on, and the power driven diesel kit kind of allows the foot to go back and forth depending on how much fuel and boost you want. This part back here was not moving. This is the part of the fuel rack. It's a thin, 1/4 inch, whatever, piece of steel, and it basically rides alongside the camshaft, the lobes of the camshaft, to distribute fuel through the delivery valves here. These are the delivery valves. Well, those are like the plungers, essentially. The delivery valves are all out here because I was looking through the ports there to see if anything was jammed up. And what I found was this number one plunger right here for cylinder number one was, so when you move this, the throttle, you can see that each of them turns and spins, and that lets fuel in from the fuel rail. So that overflow valve I was just mentioning comes in back here. The fuel inlet is right here. So it's coming from the fuel filter housing all the way here, from the lift pump, from the tank, and this orifice is filled with fuel. This is filled with oil. So I was getting fuel I was priming it and fuel's coming out of here, no air bubbles, fuel's coming out of here, but I'd start the truck up and it wouldn't turn over, like it would turn over, but I would get no white smoke. I'd have no fuel bleeding out from these. I ended up determining that my fuel rack was most likely stuck and that this could possibly mean a full rebuild, which costs around $2,000 to $3,000. With only a few weeks left until the move, money was getting tight, so I opted to go over to Harper, Oregon, which ended up being a 12-hour drive there and back, for another P-pump, which I found for $550. Of course, when I got home, I realized that the rack on this one was also stuck.
Son of a bitch! You done messed up, Aaron!
After revisiting my original P-pump, I was able to free up the fuel rack with some WD-40 and a screwdriver and get it working again. Because generally that's how you would crack the injector lines and that's how it will work. This is the fuel rack travel. So that angle iron looking piece of steel comes out of that port. The angle iron is inside a piece of steel here that profiles it so it doesn't come out. This wasn't Loctited enough or torqued down enough, so this has actually worked its way out and almost came all the way out. And if you look on the back of the timing cover, there's a little port for this so that it doesn't come out. I would assume that's what that's for, but you can't get it out unless you take the whole injection pump out. So what I read though is that this could be a very costly mistake if that does happen, because you could potentially damage one of the lobes on the cam, which I might have. I don't think that I did, because I do see travel now and I don't hear any binding. I'm gonna make sure that everything's well oiled, put all the delivery valves back in, obviously, and make sure that this is Loctited. So I just went and got some blue Loctite. You could probably use red, but I don't think this is gonna be an issue. What I didn't do is I just didn't torque this down when I was assembling the P-pump, last year. So I'm gonna make sure that that stays in there. And I think that's actually one of the main sources for my oil leak, because you can see it is moist up in here, that's for sure. And some of that's oil, but I think a lot of that was actually diesel coming out from the pump. That would also explain my, not subpar mileage, but I thought I was not getting as good of mileage as I should, even though I kind of just roll coal and hoon everywhere. So anyways, I'm gonna get all this put back together. The first real obstacle I hit was when I was coming out of the city heading up over the pass around Mount Hood. I was actually heading into a lightning storm once I got out to Eastern Oregon around Burns area around midnight. Around 5 a.m. I started to enter northern Nevada and it looked really pretty. There was a really cool sunset and the storm was starting to wear off. The sun started to hit immediately and the temperatures rose really quick as I started to worry about the coolant temperature. I even headed through a little town called Austin, Nevada. The roads were a little sketchy, so trying to figure out the steering was a little fun. Fixed the fuel rack and everything, and it's all back, and made it a 1,000-mile trip in 22 hours while towing the Corolla with all my possessions. So yeah, there's some oil leaks. There's some issues like the rear springs. It got into the kind of the rear quarter here. I want to go ahead and address this eventually and just take it out, I think. Or I can adjust my links, because they're all adjustable, all four. So I can just adjust from here. Not really too much of an issue. Even with all that towing and fully loaded, I only scraped a couple times. Another thing I want to do is try and make my own bumper that takes off some of this part of the box part of the frame, moves it back for a better departure angle, and then I want to incorporate a hitch mount into the bumper and make it kind of like, I'll post a picture here, kind of like a Jeep bumper, if you will, but just do something a little bit different. But yeah, again, $380 on diesel, sorry, and probably averaged about 16 to 17 miles a gallon with all that, so pretty impressive. Anyways, sorry it's been so long, guys. I know I owe you quite a bit more content. It's coming. We're only 2 hours away from St. George now, so we've got a lot more content we can make wheeling out here on the rocks, and then we'll do some Moab trips eventually. So anyways, thanks for watching and have a good night.